Hey, what's up there, surfers? So we're back to working on this 1995 Toyota Camry, and as you can see, it has come back to us with a little tiny scratch on the side. Alright, so now you're probably thinking the same thing I am, which is to, oh well, time for a new car. But that's just not an option for the owner of this car right now, and at least for the time being, he just wants this to get into driving condition so he can drive it around until he can get a new car. And in order to do that, we need to figure out why this wheel is bent inwards. Here, you guys might be able to see it better at this angle. Alright, so we're going to apply our emergency parking brakes and raise and support this side of the car. Alright, now before I remove the wheel, I'm just going to move it back and forth, see if I feel any looseness. And I really can't feel any looseness, so what we're going to do next is to just remove the wheel and take a closer look. Alrighty, now let's take a closer look. And honestly, I expected things to be broken, but now that I just took a quick look around, I don't see anything broken, but it does look that this part of the steering knuckle is a little bit dented in. I can tell that because the distance on the sides is not exactly equal. Here's a close-up on this side versus this side. And here's a look at things underneath, and underneath here I don't really see many things bent out of shape. This ball joint is actually supposed to be angled this way, but it's obviously a little too much when I compare it to the other side. That's because the top of the steering knuckle is bent in. But regardless, we're going to replace this ball joint. There's no point in taking a chance and driving around with a ball joint that could be potentially damaged. And here's a look at our CV joint, and I don't really see any damage to this joint. You know, these joints are made so that they can move left to right and up and down, and since only the top of this steering knuckle got pushed in, this probably just is bent back a little bit, but I don't think any damage has come to this CV joint. Alright, and here's a closer look at our strut though, and as you can see, our strut is shoved all the way against this part of the frame. Furthermore, our steering knuckle, which is right down here, it looks like it has pushed in this bottom part of the strut where it attaches to, and as a result now this part is not exactly straight and it's bent in a little bit like this. Alright, so it looks like we're going to have to replace the lower ball joint, the steering knuckle, and the strut. But again, since budget is an issue for the owner of this car, what I'm going to do is just to get the lower ball joint new, but the steering knuckle and the strut, we're going to go get from a junkyard just to try to save some money. Alright, so first thing we want to do is to disconnect our outer tie rod from our steering knuckle. And we do that by first removing this cotter pin. So first, we're just going to straighten it out, and then we're just going to push it or pull it through. Or at least that's the plan. There we go. Oh, shoot. Alright, so this looks like this thing is rusted in place and it's turning with the shaft that's inside this outer tie rod. Alright, so let's try this. I'm going to put this wrench on this locking nut for this outer tie rod in, and then I'm going to really pull to one side. That way maybe this shaft inside here is going to bind, and then a little bit, and then we can use our impact gun to get this nut off. And also, as you can see, now this outer tie rod is really shot, and we are going to replace this one as well. There we go. Alright, and the way you want to detach this outer tie rod from your steering knuckle is to basically get a hammer and hit it right here on the steering knuckle side. The vibration from the impact of this hammer is going to break things loose, and then you should be able to remove this outer tie rod in. There we go. Alright, so next we're going to remove our axle nut. First, some good old PV blaster. Next, we remove the cotter pin. That's a lot easier than the other one. And then we'll remove this piece. Next, we get our 30mm socket on the axle nut and get our primer over it. Alright, so in order to keep our wheel from turning as we're loosening our axle nut, I'm going to jam this punch that I got from my chisel and punch set inside this rotor underneath this bracket for a caliper. So as we turn that wrench counterclockwise, this comes up and rests against this bracket and keeps our wheel in place. You know what? I'll also use this long piece of pipe for more leverage. There we go. Kind of surprised. I thought this was going to give us a lot more grief than it actually did. Alright, but before we remove this axle nut completely, you want to just make sure that you can press on this shaft and that it's moving inside of this hub. If it's not, then you want to just spray some PV blaster in here and then get this flush with the end of this shaft, and then hit it with a hammer until this engages the hub that's inside your steering knuckle. Alright, next I'm gonna remove our caliper and our caliper assembly as one unit by removing two bolts that are on the back, but before I do that I'm gonna disengage this brake line from our strut by removing this one bolt that's right here. There we go. Alright, now before I completely remove this bracket with the caliper, what I like to do is just to get a screwdriver or a pry bar in here and just press in this rotor against the piston inside this caliper, so that when we go to put this back on the rotor next time when we're ready to put things back together, it's a lot easier. Now I'm going to be reusing these brake pads, but if you're going to be putting new brake pads on, you want to just make sure you press in the piston all the way. Alright, next we're ready to take these bracket bolts off. First this top one. Alright, next we want to get underneath and remove the lower bolt, but before we remove that bolt, you want to make sure you have a place set up so that you can rest this on, because you don't want this to be dangling off by the brake line. There we go. Now we can remove our rotor. Next it's time to remove these two bolts that attach our steering knuckle to our strut. There's the second one. Alright, now we should be able to tap these out. There we go. There we go. Now we attach this from our strut, like that. And then push through this end of our CV shaft and get it out of our steering knuckle. Like this. And as you can see also, we don't have a ball joint that's pressed into our lower control arm. This is the bolt-on type. So in order to detach this from our lower control arm, we're going to remove these two bolts, these two nuts and one bolt. Now we just pull on this and there we go. Alright, here's a look at our steering knuckle out of the car. And you know, to be honest, I don't see any obvious signs of this thing being damaged or cracked or anything, but I'm still not going to risk it. And also, here's a look at the bolts. They don't look bent out of shape and whatnot, but still, you know, I'm not going to risk it. It could be just the strut, but I'm still going to replace both. You know, I'm not going to risk, you know, these things could be, their structural integrity could be compromised, and I'm not going to put these back on the car, okay? Alright, next we're going to remove our strut assembly, and since we already removed the steering knuckle, the only thing that are attaching our strut to our vehicle are going to be this 3 nuts. And before we remove the last nut, we want to grab a hold of our strut so it doesn't fall down, okay? Here's a closer look at the strut, and you guys will be able to tell better as I turn this that there's a bend at the bottom of this part right here. Alright, so I just got back from the junkyard, and here's a look at our strut that we're going to be putting in the car. As you can see, towards the bottom, this one's a lot more straight, and when you compare it to the old one. And also, here's a look at our steering knuckle. Alright, so the first thing we actually put on is our lower ball joint. Alright, here's a word of caution. If you're going to be doing this on a Toyota Camry like I am, make sure you reuse the old nuts and bolts that hold this to the lower control arm, because if you use the supplied ones, this is going to be loose in here and you don't want that. Alright, next we torque him down. Next we'll put on our strut. Next we torque these down to our manufacturer's torque specifications. Alright, next we'll slide on our new steering knuckle over our ball joint. Next we'll put on our castle nut. Next we torque it down, and in order to keep this from moving, I've temporarily put in the outer tie rod in back here. There we go. Next we'll put in our cotter pin. Alright, next we'll slide in our CV joint. There we go. Alright, next we'll line up our steering knuckle to our strut. And then we put in one of these bolts. I'm also replacing these bolts just because, again, I don't trust the structural integrity of the old ones. Alright, so after wrestling with this for a little bit, we just got the first bolt in. Now, we'll line up the second bolt and slide it in. There we go. Alright, next we torque these guys down. It's one. Alright, next it's time to remove our outer tie rod end, but before we do that, we need to loosen this locking nut. So I've just put this back in the steering knuckle temporarily and hand tightened the castle nut underneath so it stays in place while I loosen this locking nut. There we go. Alright, next we can remove it, but it's important to keep track of how many turns it takes to remove this, because when you put in your new outer tie rod end, you're going to put it the exact same number of turns. But either way, you're still going to have to get an alignment, but this just makes the job a lot easier for the alignment shop. Alright, so this is 1 turn, 13, 14, and 14 and a half that it took to remove this outer tie rod. Now we put on our new tie rod end. So there's 1, 2, 3, and we'll count that as 14 and a half. Alright, so we just slide it into our steering knuckle and torque it down. Also, let's not forget about our cotter pin. Next, you want to make sure you tighten down this locking nut. Next, we'll put on our rotor. Next, we'll slide on our caliper and attach it to our caliper bracket by these 2 bolts. You want to make sure you start one by hand, then switch over to the other one so that you're not cross-threading them and that you can line them up easier. Alright, next we torque these down. Also, let's not forget to reattach this brake line to our strut. Alright, next we torque down our axle nut. And last but not least, our cotter pin. Alright, so let's just get our wheel back on and get this car back on the ground. Alright, looks like we were able to solve our problem. But now with the wheel back on straight, now it's quite obvious. Actually more telling exactly how bad this accident was. Alright, that's all there is to it, folks. Now all we have to do is just get our front wheels aligned and we should be good to go. And if you want to know how you can do it yourself, then I suggest you watch the video I made recently on how you can do your own front wheel alignment. I'll put it up on the screen as a video link so you can click on it. I'll also put some other videos up that you may find interesting as well. So with that said, I hope this video helps people out there. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more like it. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.